You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the show. Excited to be here today, especially excited because there's no doubt in my mind that this will be one of our top 5 most controversial shows ever, especially in this day and age with the topic that we're about to speak about being so popular. But the reason why I'm doing this show today is not to condemn any one expert or nutritionist or diet plan at all. It's never my goal. My goal with the Cabral Concept is simply to provide as much education as I can from a non-biased perspective, looking at both the science, looking at ancient wisdom, and then looking at clinical practice of what I see every single day, seeing 20,000 or so appointments per year. So what I'm about to speak about is the carnivore diet. And those people who don't know about the carnivore diet, simple, easy explanation that I would like to just present you with first, and then we'll go through the information of whether this diet actually stacks up in terms of evolutionary standpoint, in terms of our anatomy and physiology, in terms of our digestive system, our microbiome, etc. So I hope to do this again from an unbiased perspective. I've never cared at all in my life which diet is the best. I never have a dog in the race. That's never my position that I take. I try to take one from simply an outsider who's trying to learn and understand and then educate others on the absolute best health practices in the world. And I do hope to share that with you today. Okay, so let's go through now what would be on a typical carnivore diet. So people following a carnivore diet right now, it can actually vary from person to person. That's always the interesting thing about how we tweak programs, right? And nutrition plans. It's funny because paleo used to just be foods that a Paleolithic person would eat. And then we said, okay, but let's cook them. And then we said, okay, maybe we can use things like coconut flour and we can make, desserts and stuff like that. And then, we'll talk about keto another day, but we'll focus on the carnivore diet today. So typically a carnivore diet would be meats and seafood, such as it could be shellfish or it could be fish itself. It would be included on this would be any type of cheese or full-fat cheese, butter, eggs, water. And then, interesting enough, a lot of people, of course, are allowed to have coffee on their carnivore diet. So they allow that. What they're trying to do, though, is essentially not eat any carbohydrates. So if we're trying to eat like a carnivore, well, then we're eating predominantly just meat. Now, you can absolutely have fish in there or things like that. So that's all part of a carnivore diet. Now, some people are saying, well, I have some berries and I have some vegetables, but it's meat at every meal. But, the truth is, if we look at what a real carnivore would eat, we're really just talking about, okay, it's some type of flesh-based food for 2 or 3 meals per day, or maybe they're just doing once per day, which actually be a little bit healthier. So we're going to talk about different variations of the diet. If you're going to do it, what would be a healthier aspect of doing it? And then the pitfalls and dietary concerns, and also I would say the health and lifestyle concerns as well to be worried about. So the reason why, though, a lot of people are doing the carnivore diet, and I totally understand this and I empathize with it, is whenever they eat fruits or vegetables, they either gain weight, their blood sugar goes up, they get bloating, they get gas, they get acid reflux, all sorts of digestive-based issues. And as I'll share with you at the end, the problem with this is not the foods that they're eating. That's why I'm doing this show. It's not the foods that you're eating if you get those symptoms when you eat a vegetable, right? Or fruit. It's not the fruit's fault, and it is not the vegetable's fault. It's the fault of the microbiome that's become imbalanced because of antibiotics, alcohol, birth control, NSAIDs like Advil, ibuprofen, chlorinated water, fluoride in water, anything with any type of Splenda or sucralose, other substances that you can put into your body that begin to wipe out a lot of the good bacteria. From there, it can allow for what's called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, as well as candida overgrowth. And so what happens is we increase the population of fermentable pathogens, many of that are own good bacteria, but it's become overgrown, such as E. coli or Klebsiella or other forms of bacteria in our gut, and Candida, which is a fermentable yeast that feeds on certain carbohydrates, such as fructo, oligo, di, mono, and polysaccharides. So these are just certain chains, and it comes from fructose and lactose and a lot of carbohydrates that end in ose, right? So we can look at that and we can say, all right, these are fermentable natural sugars that people with an overgrowth of pathogens such as yeast that I just spoke about and bacteria will start to feel more bloating, more gas, sometimes constipation, sometimes loose stool. We label them as having IBS, or sometimes we say it's Crohn's, or sometimes we'll go and say it's colitis. But many of these have they're multifactorial, which means it has to do with stress, it has to do with inflammation, it has to do with IgM, IgG, and IgA sensitivities to certain foods. So again, there's a lot to it, but never once was it necessarily the carbohydrates food. The carbohydrate is simply being allowed or you being used as fuel to ferment in the gut. But the goal is not to use a Band-Aid approach. That is the problem I look at with a carnivore-based diet, is that this is not the healthiest diet in the world, and I'm going to share with you why. But the problem is this. Now, some people just call themselves biohackers, and they're just doing it because it's the latest, greatest trend. That's never the reason to do a diet. So I'm more empathetic with the people that say, I can't eat any of these carbs because then I get migraines or my joints hurt or I get skin rashes and psoriasis and eczema and Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis and MS and lupus. I get it. Believe me, I was there. I understand it. So this is the problem, though. I want to help all of those people. And in the long term, just eating meat or a high flesh food diet is not the answer. It's not the answer to a long, healthy life. We don't have those populations. And again, you can try to say, oh, no, look at the Maasai, look at the Inuit. That's not true. You can look at a lot of populations and say, sure, not as much dis-ease in the body. Well, they have no processed foods, really. But here's the interesting thing. They live about 10 years less than even we Americans who have terrible health. So, yes, they're not maybe living with as much dis-ease as they age, but still, I'd prefer not to die at 68, right? 10 years less, which is, again, what a lot of the flesh-based tribes and populations live. They live about 10 years less. Now, you could blame that on many different factors. Fine. We'll go into that and we can talk about that as well, because there's always going to be a rebuttal. But what I'm trying to do is show you right now that the long-term fix is never going and pushing too hard in any one direction. So keto pushes too hard towards fats. The carnivore diet pushes too hard towards protein. Whenever we move too hard for too long in one direction, we're going to end up with certain negative repercussions. And that's what I want to share with you today. It is always about equilibrium. Now, there's many things you can do in the short term. So I get it. I understand why a lot of people go keto in the short term. And there's actually some scientific benefits to that in the short term, right? And I understand why people do a carnivore diet in the short term. I can't recommend that even in the short term, but I get it. I understand, because then they're not dealing with all the autoimmune or joint or migraine or bloating-based issues. But the problem is it's not fixing the underlying root cause condition. And if you don't fix the underlying root cause condition, all it is a Band-Aid approach. It's the equivalent to taking a statin drug for cholesterol. You're just pretending that the problem's not there. People say, well, cholesterol is genetic. Well, it's only genetic because it's in your genes. But that means there's some type of lifestyle, environment, etc. factor that cause it to be triggered. Because most people don't have high cholesterol, like I always say, when they're 8 years old. They get it when they're 38, right? So here's the issue. Why was it triggered at 38? Well, it was triggered at 38 because you had finally filled up your rain barrel, or you had got some type of imbalance within your body. And that can be hormonal, it can be stress, it can be cortisol, it can be catecholamines, it can be an imbalance in your body's ability to detoxify in the liver through phase 1 and phase 2 nutrients, which I've spoken about before. So all these topics are available. They're all available over at stevencabral.com/podcast. What I don't want to do is turn this into an hour show on the carnivore diet. So I want to just get into the science and the truth behind it. And this is, again, not a shot at anyone promoting the carnivore diet, because many people promote it in order to help people with a lot of the symptoms that I just spoke about. So I'm not against that. I'm pro-people, but I'm also pro-people for the long run. So I want people to be healthy in the long term as well. So even if you're on a carnivore diet, fine. Let's figure out why, and let's move back towards a more balanced approach. I'm going to give you 10 factors today because I said, how can I explain the carnivore diet in the best way possible without really needing to get in depth on the pH balance of the intestines and stomach versus all the different types? Well, here's the thing. There are 4 different types of digestive systems and eaters. We'll just put it that way, right? Easiest way for me to say that. Now, we have the carnivore. And what's the carnivore eating? The carnivore is eating meat. So think of that as like lions and tigers and cats. They're a carnivore-based animal. They have some pretty big incisors, and I'll talk about that part actually in a minute. I just want to explain all of them first. So you have the carnivore, and just think of it as lions, cats, even household cats, same thing. You look at the studies, like literally look at the studies, feed a cat anything but fish or meat or carnivore-based diet and they get sick, okay? So just keep that in mind. Now, omnivore. Omnivores are meat and plant-based eaters. So some animals, they'll eat grass, they'll eat meat, they'll eat whatever is available. They won't eat fruit, but they'll eat cellulose-based foods, they'll eat plants, and they'll eat meat as well. And some examples of omnivores would be pigs or bears or possums or skunks or squirrels or chipmunks, mice, rats, badgers, anything that's kind of like scurries along. It will eat other animals, small than itself usually, and it will eat plants and whatever's available. Again, small berries, it will eat some of those as well. So what we're also looking at, and this is now, a lot of people put omnivores in that category. And I would say we've developed to be that way. But I'm going to make a case that maybe we're not genetically predisposed to that. But we'll make a case for that. Then we have the herbivore. The herbivore are animals that eat leafy grass and plants, and that's what they predominantly stick to. Now, you'll know that something is in a herbivore if you see it basically chewing just for minutes. You can kind of see their mouth moving like back and forth. And you'll think of examples of that kind of when you see cattle or cows, and they just sit there and they just chew grass for like hours, right? And they have multiple stomachs, which I'll talk about in a moment. Horses are another example of herbivore, zebra, deer. They're out there grazing all day long. Basically, if they're awake, they're grazing on some type of grass or plants. And then we have one other type of eater, we'll call it that way, and that's a frugivore. So some examples of frugivores would be monkeys and bats and something like a koala. We have rats in there as well. So what we're looking at are different types of eaters. Now, the frugivore, I will say, is usually lumped in with the omnivore. They're very, very close. The difference being when available, they would prefer to eat more fresh fruit, vegetables, and nuts. That's really the only difference. Their digestive tract is quite similar to the omnivore, but would vary in terms of kind of how it gets around and how it digests. So let's go through just a little bit of that right now. So with the carnivore, they're not bipedal, so they're going to walk on 4 legs. They typically have sharper fangs, bigger incisors. They're better at fighting off other prey or predators. And they have, just for the mouth, because we're looking at digestion, smaller salivary glands. They have a very acid-based mouth with no digestive starch enzymes in the mouth. And they are very good at making a lot of stomach acid. Okay, so that's carnivore. Think of that as the cats and the bigger prey-based animals that hunt meat. Okay, the omnivore would be, again, another animal that walks on all 4. They have sharp fangs. They have pretty good size incisors. I didn't talk about the carnivore, but they have sharp claws typically as well. Omnivore, slightly smaller claws, but they still do have claws as well. No digestive starch enzymes for the mouth, and more of that acid-based stomach. So interesting, too, about these carnivores and omnivores. Typically, the carnivore, the intestines are about 1.5 to 3 times its body length. And what that allows for is a very fast in, so food coming in, and then food coming back out. So, fairly quick. We're looking about transit time for a carnivore of complete digestion, 2 hours, 4 hours total of how it moves through the digestive tract. So pretty quick. For the omnivore, since there's going to be a mix between meat and some vegetables or tubers, things like that, it's going to be somewhere around 6 to 10 hours. They have the shorter digestive tract, not quite as short. Instead of being like 1.5 to 3 times its body length, it's about 3 times its body length. And the reason is the longer the digestive tract, the more it's able to break down carbohydrates because it starts to ferment them and it can actually use them for fuel. So that's interesting in and of itself. When we look at the herbivore, we're looking at, so now we just moved from omnivore-based creatures. Again, those are the ones that are going to be able to, bears and things like that, eat both veggies as well as some meat. When we look at herbivores, we're looking at the horses that I spoke about, the cattle, the cows, and they are going to be grazing most of the day. Interesting because we're looking at multiple stomachs. We're looking at a long digestive tract, about 20 times their body length. Just last week, I believe it was last week, I talked about how humans aren't elephants. You know, it's like we can't make the comparison to humans being an elephant or a pure herbivore. We can't say that. The reason we can't say that is that herbivores are eating hundreds of pounds typically of food per day, sometimes multiple stomachs, not always the case. They have a very large hind gut, which enables them to really break down food over 2 days, about 48 hours. The elephant breaks down food around 50 hours, and they produce up to 2,000 liters, think of a liter water bottle, of methane gas per day. Luckily, humans are not herbivores, right? We simply can't tolerate that large amount of cellulose, which I'll get to in a moment. So we know that humans are not herbivores. We know that we don't even have the same type of molars that they do, or they have a lack of any type of canine or incisor-based tooth. So we understand that really weak hydrochloric acid in the molt of an herbivore. They do have enzymes that breaks down starch, which is great. You know, that obviously is helpful, and they can break down cellulose as well. Humans cannot, right? It's more difficult. However, cellulose is beneficial in humans because it creates peristalsis. Keep that in mind. In a carnivore diet, is there any cellulose? No, there's not, because there's limited or no carbohydrates, which means there can be constipation, there can be fermentation and putrefaction of the meat because of a lack of peristalsis. Again, keep that in mind. Then we have the frugivore, and the frugivore is really a tough one to even make a case for because the frugivore almost always has a certain percentage of their diet from some type of meat or grubs or worms, etc. But the best version of a frugivore would be like a monkey or chimpanzee or something like that. And humans are very closely, obviously related. 99+% of our genes and physical makeup, same as a chimp. So I've always done my research and looked at that. And I started this research many, many years ago because I was on a quest for the truth, and that's the bottom line. So the interesting thing about the frugivore is they're the only one that can walk upright or on all fours, so bipedal or on all fours. They have smaller canine teeth, just used for basically self-defense. Remember, the canine teeth and the incisors, they're really used for self-defense and also ripping through flesh. Keep that in mind for one moment as well. The way that the jaw sits is very different as well. So keep in mind with the frugivore, the jaw sits pretty nicely right on top of the lower jaw, and it allows for some lateral but good forward mobility, basically, of how they chew. Now remember, an herbivore is going more lateral, side to side. They're also regurgitating their food, bringing it back up, and chewing it again. So again, this is another reason why I say we don't need to eat 3 huge salads a day. I don't think our digestive tract's necessarily set up for that either. So another interesting thing about the frugivore is they do secrete salivary amylase and other enzymes to break down starches and carbohydrates. A little lower stomach acid, well, I should say much lower stomach acid than a carnivore, and slightly greater than an omnivore. Slightly less than an omnivore as well, but much greater than a herbivore, which is only eating plants. So we need a little bit more. So the herbivore, 20 times the intestinal length. Frugivore, about 9 times or so the intestinal length. Again, a frugivore is mainly eating fruit, vegetables, and nuts. Human length, what's the length of the human intestines? 9 times their body length as well. And they have the mid-sized colon. It's much, much smaller than the herbivore. And again, the digestive tract is simply not very long at all. We're talking about 6 feet or so of a carnivore, where ours is around 28 feet. And total digestion time of humans, same as frugivore, about 12 to 18. So when we look at just the anatomy, physiology of the digestive system, we are best matched up with frugivores. Now, again, because I have no side, I'm just after the truth. Now, frugivores, we typically say, oh, well, they just eat fruit, vegetables, and nuts. So that's what humans should basically be eating. And I would say, you know what? You're right. We probably should be leaning mainly to fruits, vegetables, and nuts. And nuts, for a lot of reasons, don't work as well for humans right now. Many of us have a dysfunctional gut, and so we don't do well with as many lectins. We don't do as well with as many other natural plant-based pesticides and different things like phytic acid. However, we can chew them up really well. We can mix them with our saliva. We could even sprout them if we wanted to. But anyway, fruits and vegetables should make up the predominance of our diet. There's no doubt about that, and I'll get into that in just a moment. Now, keep in mind, when I did all of my research and I did my looking at, and again, I've studied Dr. Roger Williams and the differences in the intestinal tract and how there's slight variations for each human. But keep in mind, our physiology really hasn't changed too much. People talk about, oh, well, the cecum has shrank and the gallbladder's gotten larger. Sure, by percentages. We're not talking about massive, massive changes. And there was an evolutionary change where we were basically a lot like chimps, but slightly different species. And about 7 million years ago, we did move more towards the ground and out of the trees. And we would have been forced to eat a little bit more of a diverse-based diet, becoming a little bit more of an omnivore. But what would humans have eaten? Think about this. Think about this for yourself. When a carnivore sees any type of other animal walking around, when it's hungry, it will eat that animal, right? And most humans do not have that feeling. Most humans are not looking to attack another animal, bite into it, tear its flesh wide open. Again, we don't even have the teeth to be able to do that, nor do we have the claws. We would not win a battle against really any other predator, right? So as humans, you can make an argument, I don't think that we're physiologically set up to even do that. Like, why wouldn't we have been given the claws, the teeth, the very large and long digestive system if we were originally programmed? Now you can say, oh, well, we've done this, this, and this. Not really. But you can make the argument if you wanted to, but not necessarily set up in that manner to ever be able to digest those foods. I mean, if you show another animal, and this is going to be kind of graphic, but it's the truth. If you show another animal roadkill on the side of the road, it will most likely want to eat that, right? Another carnivore. Why wouldn't it? That's its food. How many humans' mouth starts to salivate when they see roadkill or they see another animal? Very few, right? Very few. There's probably a couple people out there, but very few. So how many people, though, they look at delicious fruits, or they look at, veggies, and they could be plant-based veggies as well. It could be anything. It could be avocados. It can be anything like that. Most people enjoy the taste of fruit, if their taste buds have not been perverted at all. So you have to understand, even if you're out in the wild, keep in mind, I'm not talking about spears, and I'm not talking about rocks, and I'm not talking about eventually, because again, eventually we created fire, but in the beginning we didn't. So you would have to what? You'd have to run up to what? Name an animal. Name an animal. A wild boar? So you're going to run up to a wild boar and you're going to kill it how? How? Even if it was incapacitated, how would you possibly rip through that animal's flesh, get through its fur, and eat it? And how would you even chew up all of that muscle meat? Now, you would be able to eat internal organs easier. You'd be able to eat the contents of the inner stomach. And I know that sounds graphic, but the truth is, humans were the original scavengers. We would go after animals because we were starving, and we would, whenever the larger game animals and predators, the carnivores, would eat the animal, we would be able to eat the bone marrow, and we would be able to eat maybe contents in the stomach. We would be able to eat whatever was left over, and that's the truth. But really, what we would have been able to eat were grasshoppers and crickets and worms and grubs, things that we never talk about. We call them gross. But really, that's the original human diet. There's no doubt about that. Again, put someone outside, no weapons. What are you going to catch? Good luck even catching a rabbit. Good luck, right? You're really faster than a rabbit? No. Could you get lucky every once in a while? Absolutely. And then would you eat that rabbit? Of course, you'd be able to, right? Because you would be able to use rocks, and you would be able to use that to actually, again, open the animal up. But then you'd have to eat that raw. Is that enticing to you to eat that animal raw? Now, you might say, well, we've kind of grown out of that. We've grown soft. Maybe. And if you're starving, yes, you probably would eat that. There's no doubt about it. I have no doubt. But again, think about having no fire either. To say we're built to be able to do that is absolutely incorrect. It does not match up with any part of our physiology. It doesn't match up with the enzymes in our mouth, the acidity of our mouth. It doesn't match up with our teeth structure. It does not match up with our stomach, with our digestive time. It doesn't match up with the length of the stomach. It doesn't even match up with the microbiome. There is no physiological resemblance to us or a carnivore. You can make the argument for an omnivore. What does that mean? Well, some part of your diet is meat or fish or shellfish, etc. Some part. And again, I can get behind a vegan argument. I can get behind an omnivore argument. I can get behind them. But no matter what, the amount of meat or flesh-based food that you eat should be a small part of your diet. I did a podcast that's been passed around quite a few times on the mounting evidence against meat. And if you want to check that out, please do so. It does not say that you can't eat any for those people that are just looking to find fault in it. Because I know, remember, when people are into a certain dogma, when they don't leave their mind open, they're going to fight and defend and defend. Let down your defenses. You don't have to believe the argument if you don't want to. It's okay, right? We can still be friends. Everything is good. We're just having a discussion on the amount of meat that you really believe a human should eat. And it should make up a small amount of the diet, right? There are many, many studies. And if you go above 19% of your diet, really above 10%, but if you go about 19% of your diet, just even total protein, you're looking at a greater increase in many different diseases of the body. And then you'll have the retractors say, yes, but that wasn't grass-fed beef. It wasn't this. Understood. I get it. Grass-fed is much better. Pastured eggs and chicken is much better. Wild fish is much better. I understand. I'm talking about total quantity. And I'm also talking about whether it's grass-fed or not, the increase in IGF-1 levels. But that's a different podcast if you want to check that one out. I also have to let you know this, is that our brains, now it's interesting here, because a lot of people say, well, meat's going to help you with your blood sugar. Not necessarily. Check out your blood sugar. You can use a simple at-home glucometer after eating a 12-ounce steak. Look at what it is an hour after eating that steak because of the glycemic load. Most people don't know that you can spike blood sugar by eating a meat-heavy diet. Now you have the worst of all worst diets. You have high blood sugar with protein and fat in the diet. Not good. Not good at all. Really bad idea, actually. So don't think that you're going to always keep your blood sugar low on a high-protein diet. It's where most people go wrong with keto. Their diet is too high in protein when they're trying to use it for beneficial blood sugar or cancer tumor base, other issues. And again, that's still not a long-term diet, but we'll go over that show another day as well and go through all of that. Here's the other issue. You don't want to cut out carbohydrates. They are very important for human survival for a few reasons. One is that now we can make our brain run on ketones. There's no doubt about that. But our brain was built actually to run on glucose. I know how that's such a buzzword today, but it was. Your brain was meant to run on glucose. Here's the thing. But because your brain is 90% fat, people get mixed up in their anatomy, in their physiology, and they don't understand that just because your brain is fat doesn't mean you fuel it with fat. But again, we'll save that for another day. Your brain runs predominantly on glucose, but yes, it does need the omegas, and that includes omega-3s, 6s, 7s, 9s, all of them, in order to help with brain-based development, with neurological function, etc. But let's not confuse the fuel, right? Your mitochondria are bacteria. They don't need bacteria to make them run, right? It's the strangest argument, but I get it because this isn't even taught in doctoral level degrees, right? You have to look outside of it. You need to be willing and wanting to do more of the research. Your mitochondria don't need bacteria to run. What do they need? Oxygen or glucose, right? That's what we need. Can you run on lipolysis burning body fat? Of course you can, right? You look at that. But do you need fat to run on fat? No, you don't, right? You can break down your own body fat. There is, yes, but you don't have to take more in. You could burn your own body fat. That's how we look at it. So again, what we need to do, regulate blood sugar. But it's more than that. Regulate the HPA axis, regulate cortisol, regulate catecholamines. Because if you spike those, you're going to spike your blood sugar anyways, regardless of whether you took in any sugar or carbohydrates or not. And again, I urge you, drink a large coffee, black coffee. Take your blood sugar a half hour later. Do a really intense workout. Take your blood sugar a half hour later or right afterwards. You're probably going to see your blood sugar spiked. Interesting. Just take a look at that. I've explained that on previous episodes as to why as well. Here's the other thing. Our intestines are longer, not as long as an herbivore. Again, we don't have multiple stomachs. We don't have a rumen like a cow, right? We have one stomach. We can't take in a massive amount of cellulose or leaves or plant-based food. I totally get it. I agree with that as well. Again, I'm not one side or the other. You can take in some, just like you can take in some meat, right? Or some flesh. But here's the deal. Our intestines are meant to literally break down carbohydrates, feed the bacteria in the gut, make certain vitamins such as our B vitamins and our vitamin K and make our serotonin. And yes, there's B12 in animal-based products. I understand that. I understand the argument. But we're meant to actually ferment to a degree and break down and create short-chain fatty acids in that colon, right? And we need those antioxidants that are predominantly from plants in order to what? In order to prevent free radical damage, in order to prevent premature aging, wrinkling of the skin, and overall inflammation, as well as a big one, and it's called cancer. There is only one proven anti-cancer diet, and that is from phytonutrients, plants high in phytonutrients that come from fruit and vegetables, and yes, some nuts. So it all goes back to what were humans predominantly meant to eat? More like a frugivore, more fruit, vegetables, and nuts. Now, it doesn't mean that we're eating fruit all day long. I totally agree with you there. I completely agree, and I agree that most of the fruit today has been so hybridized that it's probably too sweet. But you can still stick with those lower glycemic fruit, and it doesn't mean that you need to have 30 bananas a day. I'm not saying that either. I believe in balance. I believe in equilibrium. I believe in not pushing any one diet too wildly in one direction. And I believe in a lot of vegetables as well. Low glycemic, good fiber. Why? Because it's what our intestines were designed for. If you lack fiber, which a carnivore diet does, and same with a keto-based diet, you're going to potentially set yourself up for a shrinkage of the microbiome, an imbalance in the immune system, potentially an increase in what's called lipopolysaccharides, and a potential long-term issue around carbohydrates, carbohydrate sensitivity, and overall immunity, because you're shrinking your microbiome, which is where 70% in and around the gut of the white blood cells in the immune system lives, called the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. So it's extremely important that we understand that the human diet, again, everyone has said this except our fun biohacking day and age. Look at Ayurvedic medicine. Look at traditional naturopathy. Look at bioregulatory medicine. Look at traditional Chinese medicine. Look at Taoist medicine. Look at yogic-based diets. No one has ever said, let's eat only meat. Let's do that. Do you really believe that the Maasai or the Inuit would only eat a carnivorous-based diet if they have access to fresh fruit? If they had access to a colorful diet? You really think they would say, no, we're just going to stick here to drinking milk with a little bit of blood in it from the animal? Do you really think that that's all they would choose to do? You don't think that that's out of necessity, right? You don't have to do that. It's not out of necessity. And a lot of people don't even know that Inuit as well, they'll ferment their fish. And it helps to break it down. And fish is actually totally different than meat as well. So I created another podcast many, many moons ago called The Foundation of All Diets. And I went into the blue zones. And I went into the Mediterranean diet. And I spoke about a lot of these things. And what you're finding are the diets with the most amount of anti-aging, longevity, and balance to them. Does it need to be the exact diet for you? No, you can tweak it for you. But what I don't want you to do is fall prey to these fad-based diets, because it's what they are. They're not going to last. And the real reason I created this show, because I'm not a person that seeks out controversy. I'm not. I'm a person that tries to bring both sides together. I try to bring a vegan-based diet and a carnivore and a keto and a Mediterranean and just say, hey, what do we all have in common? Like, what can we find in common? Well, we're trying to help people, right? That's what we're trying to do. So if you believe in eating some meat and eating some fish, well, I'd say go more towards the high omega fish, the sardines, the anchovies, the wild salmon, the trout, the mackerel, right? Get your omega-3s up. We do so much omega-3 testing, we can tell most people are off. And then as well as just get your diet 60 to 80% plant-based. I like to have people in my practice and the people I work with and people I just speak with around the world to be 80%. You can't go wrong. Honestly, you can't go wrong. You're erring on the side of thousands of years and also the anatomy and physiology of the natural human. If you want to eat a little meat, okay. I don't think it's going to be probably too big of a deal for most people. A little fish, probably no big deal. couple eggs a week, probably no big deal, right? What we're looking at is the overdoing. So a couple recommendations. One, if you're doing a carnivore-based diet right now and you love it, then good for you. I'm not going to say not to do it. What I'm going to say is make sure that you don't eat meat at 3 meals per day, that you're eating 1 or 2 meals maximum per day. Now, do I think that's great for a human? No, I do not. I don't. And I've gone over that long of a fast every single day in the past on my podcast. So please just go back to stephencabral.com/podcasts. Okay? But what you don't want to do is eat meat and have that many times per day in the digestive tract and trying to break that down, right? Because the stomach acid just simply isn't strong enough, especially with so many people being, if you're on Prilosec, Zantac, an acid blocker, you have H. pylori, you have any type of lower esophageal sphincter-based issues, and you're eating a high-meat diet in the first place, that's just bad idea. I'm not going to get into that right now, but it's very detrimental to your overall health because you're not even producing stomach acid. How do you plan on breaking down the meat? It has to be in a low pH stomach. So what I'm recommending is if you're on the carnivore-based diet, get more towards your fish, wild-caught, clean-based varieties. No more than your lunch and your dinner per day, or no more than your breakfast and your lunch per day, skipping one of those meals and going for a longer fast so that your digestive system has more time to move all of that protein through. My real hope is that you're not on a 3-time-a-day meat diet, or you're not on a strictly carnivore-based diet because you're missing all of your plant-based antioxidants and phytonutrients, the things that have been proven to prevent cancer. Now, you can say meat doesn't cause cancer. You can make that argument. Totally fine. I'll listen to that argument. But what you can't say is that meat prevents cancer. Now, we do know what helps to prevent cancer, and that's fruit and vegetables. That's antioxidants, right? So let's be clear about that. Now, most people, for all the people out there that did a carnivore-based diet, because they were doing it because of digestive issues, wellness issues, etc. I get it. I know where you're coming from. We've literally worked with over 250,000 people. And I'm not saying you need to work with us. What I'm trying to say is this. Prove it to yourself. Go back on a normal diet just for a couple weeks so that you don't have the shrinking of the microbiome, because you'll never know. Run an organic acids test. Run a stool test. Okay? Just those two. Don't even worry about all the other tests. I'll link them up in the show notes today. Simply go to stephencabral.com/1089. Run the organic acids test. It's a simple urine test you can do right at home. Run the stool test. It will let you know about H. pylori, bacterial overgrowth in your gut. The organic acids test will let you know about yeast overgrowth, candida overgrowth. But again, you can't be on a diet with no carbs when you do it because you're just shrinking the microbiome. Eventually, you're going to eat carbs again. There's no person that does a carnivore-based diet for life. Very few people. We're talking about fractions of people, right? So eat a normal diet for a month. You can always go back to the carnivore if you want. Take the 2 labs. See if that's what the issue is. Because remember, there's always a reason why you have the bloating, the acid reflux, the heartburn, the autoimmune, the digestive issues, the IBS, the joint pain, the muscle issues, the brain fog, the fatigue. There's always an issue why. It can be corrected, and today's show is meant to be empowering, not pulling people down. So hopefully the show was helpful. I could go on and on. There are many, many other reasons, but I just don't want you to use a Band-Aid approach. I want you to always ask why. I want you to figure out your symptoms rather than pretending they're not there. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. If this show is helpful, please do feel free to pass it along to anyone else it may serve. Did you know that the body really only becomes sick or imbalanced in only 2 ways? Over time, you become deficient in vital nutrients, and you also accumulate toxins internally and from the environment. As those nutrients diminish and you increase your total toxic load, your body then begins to show the first signs of dis-ease. It's actually quite predictable, and the good news is that if we know how you began to fill up that proverbial rain barrel, we also know how to empty it to begin the healing process. I was fortunate enough to learn this ancient healing process from my mentor after suffering from debilitating diseases for close to a decade. It was only when I began to implement these techniques did I finally overcome my illnesses and go on to live a life of energy and vitality that I now enjoy. I'd like to share with you now what I discovered after traveling all over the world and how to combine the best of ancient healing wisdom with state-of-the-art science. Allow me to teach you exactly how I've been able to help over 250,000 people to empty their rain barrel and begin to transform their body and lives into what they've always hoped they could be. To get your copy of the international bestseller, The Rain Barrel Effect, simply go to stephencabral.com/rainbarrel.